There we go. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Andrew back again with another video, and look what's behind me. Yep, that's right. I just built my own PC about 3 to 4 days ago, and this is the long-awaited PC build video. So before we get started, I just want to talk about a couple things, and the first being is that this was not an enthusiast build, although I did build this computer specifically for video editing, graphics work, all that kind of stuff. It is not an enthusiast build, and I will not be making money off of my film. So to be honest with you, I didn't really feel like I needed to get all the top of the line equipment, but some of the components like the processor, the RAM, and some of those really core components, buy the really more expensive versions so that I would really get good performance out of my video editing software. Secondly, I actually ordered all of these components from several different places. I got most of them from Newegg, but I did get some from NCIX. Like for instance, I got my monitor from Amazon. I went to Micro Center and picked up things like my processor, my motherboard, all that kind of stuff. And last but not least, although I did really want to try and get a lot of really good footage and make a really good computer build video, this was my first build, so it was very, very hard to position the camera correctly, as well as just position the camera at all, because a lot of the steps that I had to take in building this thing were very, very strenuous as well as stressful, so I wanted to make sure I did it right so I wouldn't screw it up. Just trying to set up the camera during that time while I was trying to build was really difficult. So that's why some of the footage might be lacking, some of it I just don't have footage for some of the things that I did while I was building, so I apologize for that, but I'm going to be talking to you guys basically about what I did, some tips on what you should and shouldn't do based on my experience, and then hopefully through that you guys can get a pretty good idea of how my build actually went. So yeah, with that being said, let's get into the video. So even though I did just say that this video wasn't going to be this, crazy build video, time-lapse, all that kind of stuff, I did plan on that originally. And so what I did in the first place was I went over all of the components, basically talking a little bit about them, why I chose them, the price, all that kind of stuff. So once I got all that out of the way, I moved all the components over to the side, except for the motherboard and the CPU, and I was ready to start building. So tip number one, this is of course something very, very standard that a lot of channels tell you. The main thing you should do when you're building on your motherboard is put it on the motherboard box, especially if you do not have any kind of, mats or anything like that. Static electricity is an extreme hazard for computer builders, especially in a house like mine because it's very old. The acoustics are not very good, so there's a lot of exposed wood and metal, so a lot of static electricity builds up, especially on the dry months, like in the winter time, which is when I built this. So after I took the motherboard out of the static resistant bag, I set it on the box of course and opened the CPU socket. This part was extremely stressful because there are 1,151 pins in the LGA 1151 socket, and this was of course the first build I've ever done, so seeing all those pins and all those contacts and knowing that bending just one of them was going to screw up everything, I was pretty nervous at this point. Taking the CPU out of the box, it was pretty small actually. I was a little surprised at how small it was, but it actually weighed a lot more than I thought it was going to. So the processor that I chose is an Intel Core i7-6700 processor. So this is just about one of the best i7s that you can buy without going of course into the Extreme Edition processors. And this is one of Intel's latest Skylake CPUs, which basically is like an pimped version of Haswell. So it's very, very power efficient, but it's also quite powerful. And then paired with that, I got an Asus Z170AR motherboard, which not only looks very nice, but also has all the features that I need, so I can upgrade it later on in the future with more drives, more graphics cards, more RAM, etc. So after lining up all the notches and triple checking everything, I dropped the CPU in and started to close the socket. However, when I was closing the socket, it felt a little iffy. I almost heard something cracking and I was like, what is that noise? I thought I was doing something really, really wrong, and so I opened up the socket and then eventually I just was like, you know what, I'm just gonna put it down. It's in position, the socket is going to close, so I pulled it down and everything was fine. So after that little fiasco, I moved on to installing the memory. I got 16 gigabytes of Kingston HyperX Fury RAM. My motherboard only supported DDR4, which is just fine. I think DDR4 is starting to become a bit more mainstream. So installing the memory was a lot more stressful than I thought it was going to be, because usually motherboards have two little clips on the side of the DIMM slots that you just pull out, but mine didn't have that. It only had one. So we pulled it out, and slotting the first one in, it felt a lot stiffer than I thought it was going to be. It didn't go in very well, it didn't click into place like I thought it was going to. It was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to. It didn't click, so I was like, I may have to reseat it later, maybe not. So I opened up the second slot, and the second one went much better. It was able to click into place, slotted in just fine, so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna wing it and see where it goes. So after that, it was time to prep the case. Now the first thing that I did was actually take out all the hardware and make sure everything was in order and that I had everything, because I didn't want to, start working in the case and realize I was low on standoffs or something like that. So I made sure to count everything before installing the standoffs. So installing the standoffs was a little tough. There are actually a lot more holes in the case than I thought there were going to. So installing the standoffs correctly and in the right place was a little bit tough, but I figured it out. So then I dropped the motherboard in, but of course I forgot the IO shield, so I had to take the motherboard out, put the IO shield in, drop the motherboard back in. Then I realized that I didn't install the power supply first, because I heard that it's just better to install the power supply first before you do the motherboard so that you don't accidentally drop it on the board or something like that. And for the power supply, I chose an EVGA 500B power supply. So after getting the power supply seated, I finally dropped the motherboard in for the last time and screwed it in. And after that, it was pretty much smooth sailing until it was time to install the CPU cooler. So the CPU cooler that I chose is a very popular one. It's the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. So I flipped the case up and then took the side panel off to expose the back of the motherboard tray. Now luckily the Define R5 made it extremely easy to install this because there's a nice hole in the back of the motherboard tray. However, even with that, it was still a little tough because I still had to enlist the help from my dad to hold the thumb screw in on one side, and then you had to put the plate and the nut on the other through the motherboard tray, and it was a little tough, but I eventually got it. So after I got the rear bracket installed, it was time to put on thermal paste. Now something you should definitely do when you're building your own computer is make sure that you do not pull the thermal paste away too quickly. Because most thermal paste, when you pull them away, are extremely stringy. That's just because of the little particles inside of the thermal paste that really direct the heat. Now here's something not to do. Make sure you test fit the bracket that goes on top of the CPU first before you attach it to the heatsink. This is something that I did not do. I actually attached the heatsink to the bracket and then put it right down on the CPU without doing a test fit first, and this caused me to really kind of screw up the thermal paste and almost have it spill over the CPU. But of course everything went in just fine, and after putting on the fan on the heatsink and plugging the CPU fan into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, the CPU cooler was installed. So next up, I put the 20+4 pin power connector into the motherboard. Now this was something that was pretty tough to do actually. So I routed the cable behind the motherboard tray using the grommets that are built into the R5, and then I plugged it into the socket, but it was extremely stiff. Like I was worried I was gonna break the motherboard or something. It was flexing that much. It was very stiff to really get it in there. Don't be afraid to really force things onto the motherboard. I mean, don't be rough with it, but I think the motherboard was a lot more durable than I personally thought, so that's something that you don't really need to be scared of if you build your own computer. Next, I installed the front I/O connectors. These were pretty easy, but some of them were a little bit confusing. So I plugged all of the USB 3.0 as well as 2.0 headers into their motherboard sockets, and then things like the reset button, the power LEDs all slipped onto this USB adapter, which eventually plugged into the header right on the motherboard. Next, I installed the hard drive. For the hard drive, I picked the Western Digital Caviar Blue 7200 RPM 1TB hard drive. So this was the one place where I really wished I could have gone a little more high end. I really wanted to get an SSD for this system, but as I said before, it really didn't fit in my budget. So the Western Digital Blue 1TB hard drive is going to be perfect for now. It's got plenty of storage, great speed rating, and it's already faster than my old computer. So installing that was a little bit of an interesting experience. I had to open up the tray, and then I had to put these little rubber washers in there which helped to diffuse rattling from the hard drive. Then I screwed it in from the bottom and slotted it right in the bay. Now a really cool feature of the Define R5 is the fact that you can flip the bays around, not only to get more airflow within the hard drives, but also for a better aesthetic look to the case. Then next up, I installed the optical drive, which the only reason I really wanted to use this was so that I could install Windows easily, but who knows, I may need to use it for something else, maybe movies, maybe games, I don't know. We'll see. So I slotted it in the 3.5 bay on the outside of the case, and then it was time to route most of the cables. So in terms of cabling, the 500B power supply from EVGA really does supply a lot of the cables that I needed. It came with, of course, the supplemental CPU power, which is an 8-pin. It came with enough SATA drives to connect up to 6 drives, and of course, it supported my graphics card. Which, speaking of, I used the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 960 graphics card. So this thing is a beast. Compared to the Intel HD graphics that were built into my old computer, It is amazing. So I really do applaud EVGA for this. It's fantastic. It's the super clocked version, and I believe it runs at something ridiculous like 1400 megahertz or something like that. It's absolutely crazy. It's got a pretty good factory overclock built into it. I did get this for about $160 off of NCIX for an amazing deal plus rebate. So, I mean, I can't really argue getting a $210 card for under $170. So installing the graphics card was pretty interesting. I had to slot it and re-slot it in multiple times because it just wasn't clicking in for some reason. I had to take out a lot of the little rear I/O panels on the side or on the back of the case to really allow me to get the graphics card in there without, of course, breaking anything. But it went in just fine, and from that we were ready to hook everything up. So after connecting the rest of the cables, doing a bit more cable management, cleaning things up a bit, the computer was finally done. I don't know if I'd ever felt so good before in my life that everything just went in pretty much uneventfully, and we were now about to experience the moment of truth, doing the test boot. But, of course, before that, the ceremonial taking off of the side panel plastic. Okay. Alright, so we have the ceremonial unveiling of the side window. Let's go ahead and pull this off. Where is it? Here it is. Here we go. Look. I'm just gonna take this off. So if we turn it on, then we should see fans spin.
It's off.
Okay, so plug it in.
Okay.
And now the power supply switch is turned on, right?
Nope, not yet. Should I
Okay.
turn it on?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's alive!